It was one of those days when the air felt heavy, not just from the summer heat, but from the weight of frustration, grief, and hope all tangled up together. The crowd gathered slowly on the city square, holding signs, voices rising not in anger, but in a plea for justice. Among them was a young black woman in her 40s, calm yet firm in her stance, blending into the group like any other peaceful protester. But what no one knew, what even she hadn't planned to reveal, was that she was a federal judge. One who had fought for years behind closed court doors to bring justice to the very issues now echoing through the streets. The protest was peaceful. People were marching, chanting, handing out water bottles, and linking arms. Until a single disruption shifted the whole tone. A police unit rode in, horses thundering across the pavement, eyes scanning the crowd not with understanding but with suspicion. Among them was Officer Grant, a man in his late 30s with a sharp jawline, mirrored sunglasses, and a horse that danced at the smallest movement. Grant wasn't new to crowd control, but that day, something about the presence of black voices stirred an ugly twitch in him. Maybe it was the signs. Maybe it was the songs. Or maybe it was the fear of a power he couldn't control. His horse swayed closer to the group. Protesters stepped back, cautious but not hostile. But when his gaze fell on the black woman with the green blouse and leather notebook clutched to her chest, something clicked in him. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't holding a sign. She was simply observing, watching like she had seen this all before. And she had, but to Officer Grant, her calm presence felt like defiance. "You," he barked, pointing from atop the horse. "Step back now." She raised her hands slightly, respectful. "But steady, officer. I'm not interfering. I'm standing on public property." "Wrong move." The officer tugged the reins, sending the horse rearing slightly toward her. Gasps broke out from the crowd. A young man recording on his phone shouted, "She didn't do anything." But Grant didn't pause. He nudged the horse closer, letting its bulk intimidate her as he barked again, "Move or I'll move you." The woman didn't flinch. Her eyes met his behind his sunglasses. She had seen this face before, different uniform, same arrogance. "I advise you to step down, officer," she said calmly. He scoffed. "And I advise you to stay in your place." Then, as if to make his point, Grant directed the horse forward. The front hooves landed inches from her feet, and in the moment of chaos, his arm reached down and struck her notebook from her hands, sending pages fluttering into the air. The crowd erupted. "Hey, you can't do that," someone screamed. A teenage girl ran to grab the scattered pages. Cameras and phones were now pointed directly at Grant, but he didn't seem to care. Authority made him bold, and yet, in that single moment, he made the worst mistake of his career, because just 5 feet behind him, another officer had received a message in his earpiece. His expression went pale as he turned slowly toward Grant. "Sir, you need to stop. Right now," the younger officer whispered, almost too afraid to speak louder. Grant turned, irritated. "What?" "That woman. She's a federal judge." Everything froze. The horses calmed. The shouting softened into murmurs. Officer Grant's face went blank, but it was too late. The damage was done. The woman slowly bent down, retrieved her notebook, dusted it off, and looked up not in anger, but with a kind of knowing calm that made his chest tighten. Then she turned and walked away through the parting crowd. But that wasn't the only unexpected act of the day. Just an hour earlier, on a crowded city bus heading into town, another story had unfolded. A black teenager named Elijah, quiet and thoughtful, sat near the back listening to music through one earbud. The bus stopped. A visibly pregnant white woman stepped on board, looking around for a seat. People avoided her eyes. Some looked down. Others pretended not to see her. Elijah didn't hesitate. He stood, smiled gently, and gestured toward his seat. "You can sit here, ma'am." She blinked, surprised. "Are you sure?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied. She sat with a quiet thank you, clearly exhausted. But something about his kindness struck her deeply. She kept looking at him as if trying to place a memory. Then, just before getting off, she reached into her purse and handed him a folded note. "Don't open it here," she said. "But do read it." He nodded, puzzled, and slid it into his backpack. Back in the protest square, as sirens echoed and tensions simmered just beneath the surface, Elijah now stood with the same woman, unaware how the morning's simple act of kindness would soon tie his life to hers, and to the woman who had just faced off against an officer on horseback. What no one knew yet was that the note in Elijah's backpack held more than just words. It held an invitation, a name, and a decision that could change everything. But before any of them could make sense of what was happening, an unmarked black SUV rolled up quietly at the edge of the protest. The back door opened, and the woman in the green blouse, the federal judge, stepped inside without a word, her eyes scanning the crowd one last time. Elijah noticed her as she disappeared into the vehicle, not knowing yet that their paths were about to collide. And the officer? He would soon be called into an internal investigation, but the consequences waiting for him were far greater than he imagined, because the woman he had tried to silence had spent her life giving voice to justice. And now justice was coming straight for him. The SUV glided down the side street, tinted windows hiding the woman inside from the world she had just stood before. Her fingers clutched the edge of her notebook like a shield, but her eyes remained sharp. Inside, the atmosphere was quiet, no sirens, no chants, just the hum of tires on pavement. She stared ahead, silent, while the driver, a middle-aged man in a dark suit, glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Ma'am," he said gently, "do you want to go to the courthouse, or—" She didn't answer right away. Her mind wasn't in the car. It was back there on that sidewalk, under that horse, looking up into the mirrored shades of an officer who didn't see a judge or even a human being. He saw what he chose to see. "Take me to the federal building," she finally said. "We have work to do." Meanwhile, Elijah stood at the edge of the protest, holding his phone but not recording. He wasn't sure what he had just witnessed. The woman, her calm. The officer's panic when he found out who she was. It had all happened so fast. He thought back to the bus ride and the folded note still tucked in his bag. For a second, he thought about reading it right then and there. But something told him to wait. That it mattered. That it meant more than just "thank you." He stepped away from the crowd and ducked into a quiet alley nearby to breathe. His heart was still racing, not just from the protest, but from a strange feeling in his chest. Like something was shifting. He hadn't told anyone where he was going that day. His mom thought he was heading to the library. But truth be told, Elijah had been lost lately. School was hard. His neighborhood was tense. And no matter how good he tried to be, people still crossed the street when he walked by. He didn't expect a seat on the bus to matter. He didn't expect to get noticed at all. Across town, Officer Grant sat in the precinct break room, elbows on the table, his helmet tossed beside him. He kept replaying the moment in his mind, the raised notebook, the refusal to move, and then the sentence, "She's a federal judge." His chest still tightened every time he heard those words. He wasn't sure what scared him more, how close he had come to hurting someone with that much power, or the fact that he hadn't cared until he learned who she was. For him, she had been just another protester. But now the chief had called him in, asking for a written statement, and his fellow officers had gone quiet around him. He grabbed a cup of coffee with shaky hands. The word was already spreading, not just about what happened, but about who it had happened to. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the local news sites. Nothing yet. But he knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. Back at the federal building, the judge sat at her desk, flipping through legal documents, but her mind kept drifting back to the boy. The one from the crowd. The one who stood up for her when no one else did. She had caught his face for just a second. Young, steady, a good heart in a world that didn't always value it. She reached into her desk and pulled out a copy of the same note she had given him. A backup in case she ever needed to remember what she wrote. She read it again. Then she placed it gently into a locked drawer. Outside her office, a knock came on the door. Her assistant stepped in quietly. "The Inspector General's office just called. They're requesting a statement." The judge nodded slowly. "Schedule it. But first, get me a file on Officer Grant. I want to see his record." The assistant blinked. "Personal interest?" The judge looked up, her voice level. "Professional responsibility." That evening, Elijah finally pulled the note from his backpack as he sat alone in his room. The house was quiet. His mother was working the night shift, and his younger sister had fallen asleep on the couch. He unfolded the paper with a strange mix of curiosity and nerves. The handwriting was neat, careful. It read, "Kindness is noticed more than you think. Your small action reminded me of what matters. If you're ever ready to do more with your life, truly more, call this number. Ask for Marla." MJW underneath, a number was written. Elijah stared at it for a long time. He had no idea who Mom J was. But something about the way it was written, the formality and the weight of it, told him this wasn't some random person. This was someone who mattered. And maybe, just maybe, someone who could change his life. He pulled out his phone and entered the number, but didn't call. Not yet. He needed time to think. The next morning, local news finally broke the story. Footage from the protest had gone viral. Officer Grant intimidating a peaceful black woman, the horse rearing, the scattered papers on the street. Comment sections lit up. Some defended him, others were furious. But what grabbed everyone's attention was the moment when someone in the video shouted, She's a federal judge. Suddenly, it wasn't just about an officer and a protester. It was about power, about blindness, about the lines that get crossed when no one's watching. Elijah watched the video on his phone, then watched it again. That was her. The same woman he saw at the protest. The one who got into the SUV. The one he had seen standing calm while the world around her shook. The one who gave him the note. And now he knew what MIM JW stood for. Marla J. Walters, federal judge, one of the most respected in the Eastern District. Known for her quiet style, but famous for her rulings, especially on cases that dealt with civil rights, police misconduct, and systemic injustice. Elijah's hands trembled a little as he held the paper again. Why would someone like her reach out to someone like him, unless... He looked back at his sister, still sleeping peacefully. He thought about his mother, working double shifts to pay the rent. He thought about how most people overlooked him, and then he thought about the day he gave up his seat, a tiny gesture that had somehow changed everything. But just as he reached to dial the number, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated. Then answered. Elijah? The voice asked, soft, measured, familiar. Yes? This is Judge Walters. I was hoping you'd be ready to talk. His heart pounded, but before he could answer, a knock echoed at their front door loud, sharp and unexpected. He froze. Judge Walters' voice came again through the phone. Don't open it. The line went dead, and Elijah turned slowly toward the door, unsure whether to run or stand his ground. Elijah stood frozen in the middle of the living room, the phone still in his hand, the judge's voice echoing in his head. Don't open it. The knock came again, louder this time. His little sister stirred on the couch, half awake, rubbing her eyes. Who is it? She mumbled. Elijah didn't answer. He tiptoed over to the window, pulling the curtain back just slightly. A dark sedan sat on the curb, engine running. Two men stood on the porch, suits, no badges showing, no markings. One had a tablet in hand, the other kept glancing at the street. Like he didn't want to be seen. Elijah's heart raced. He whispered, "Go back to sleep," to his sister and turned off the lights. The knocking stopped, replaced by a low conversation outside. Then the sound of the front gate swinging open. After a long minute, the car pulled away slowly, like it wasn't in a rush. Elijah didn't move until the sound of the engine faded completely. Then he backed away from the window, hands shaking. He tried calling the judge again, but the line went straight to voicemail. Across the city, Judge Walters sat in a secure room inside the federal building, a thick file open in front of her. Officer Grant's record was longer than she expected. Excessive force complaints, suspension warnings, civilian complaints that had quietly disappeared. She flipped through the papers slowly, taking mental notes. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about how many others he'd silenced, who didn't have a title to protect them. Her assistant stepped in, holding a folder. There's been movement. A private agency tried to access Elijah Brooks' school files this morning. They didn't go through official channels. Marla looked up, concerned. They're tracking him? Looks like it. She stood, her voice low and serious. Get me the director of internal affairs. I want protection on that boy. Now. At the same time, Officer Grant sat in a dim corner of his apartment, drink in hand, staring at his phone. News clips ran on the TV, his face frozen in screenshots, headlines asking questions he couldn't answer. His union rep had already warned him he was on thin ice. The Internal Affairs Department had been watching him for months, and now the whole world was too. But what worried him most wasn't the headlines. It was the silence from people who used to have his back. No calls from his captain. No messages from his usual crew. Something had changed, and that woman, Judge Walters, was the reason. He took a deep breath and opened a new text message, typing out a number he hadn't used in years. Need a favor, quiet one. Watching someone, kid named Elijah Brooks. Find out who he's talking to. He hit send. Far across the city, in a small apartment above a corner market, a young woman named Lexi opened her laptop. She was an independent reporter, known for digging up stories others ignored. She had covered protests for months, collecting clips, testimonies, and often risking her safety to expose police misconduct. That morning, her inbox had exploded. Dozens of people had forwarded the video from the protest. But what caught her attention wasn't just the footage, it was the name whispered in the background, Judge Walters. She leaned forward, replaying the video frame by frame. She saw the horse rear, the notebook fly, the moment of recognition in the officer's face. Then something strange, a teenage boy standing still, watching everything with wide, steady eyes. She zoomed in. His expression wasn't just shock, it was understanding. Like he'd seen more than just what the camera captured. She scribbled his description on a sticky note. Black teen, 17 to 19, slim build, brown jacket, standing near impact zone. Then she opened a private forum and posted a message, looking for ID on teen male witness from downtown protest, quiet demeanor, video timestamp, 3:21, tip line open. Elijah, meanwhile, couldn't sleep. The night was still, too quiet. He kept thinking about the knock, the voice on the phone, and the note. Everything had escalated so fast. What started as a seat on a bus had spiraled into something he couldn't even name. He pulled out the note again, tracing the words with his finger. If you're ever ready to do more with your life, call this number. What did that even mean? His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You okay? No name, no profile picture. He ignored it. Then a second message. If they came to your door, don't trust anyone until we talk. He stared at the screen. The words weren't comforting. They were terrifying. The next morning, Elijah didn't go to school. Instead, he took a long bus ride across town to a library where no one knew him. He used a public computer to search for Judge Marlo Walters. Articles filled the screen, old rulings, civil rights cases, quotes about equality and justice. One headline stood out: Federal judge's decision blocks city's police surveillance expansion. Another one read, Walters urges reform after civilian oversight board findings. He leaned back. So she had been fighting this fight for a long time, but why him? Why now? At that moment, in a quiet office overlooking the city skyline, a conversation was happening between two federal agents. One flipped through a folder labeled Civic Disruption, Internal case number 427B, while the other looked at an intelligence board with photos pinned in red string. This woman's causing problems again. One muttered, she's not causing problems, she's exposing them. Well, she's pulling that boy into it now. That's risky. You mean smart. She knows we won't touch her, but a teenage boy from the South Side? That's a different story. They exchanged glances. Do we intervene? Not yet. Let's see who makes the next move. Back in the city streets, Lexi finally got a response to her post, a message from a local youth worker. She clicked it open. That's Elijah Brooks. Good kid. Lost his dad last year. Keeps to himself, but respectful. Something happen? Lexi paused. Yes, something had definitely happened. She opened a new file on her desktop, Elijah Brooks, possible witness figure, and began typing notes. 1 block away, Elijah stepped off the bus, glancing over his shoulder. He didn't know who to trust. Not the police, not strangers in cars, maybe not even the number on the note. But somewhere deep down, he believed the judge meant what she said. He just didn't know the cost yet. Not for him, not for his family, not for the truth. And as he walked into the crowded cafe across from the federal building, unaware that a man had been tailing him since he got off the bus, the story was just beginning to unfold. Elijah sat near the back of the cafe, shoulders tense, hands around a cup he wasn't drinking from. His eyes moved from face to face, trying to look normal, but every shadow out of place made his heart beat faster. The folded note from Judge Walters stayed tucked inside his jacket pocket, but its weight felt heavier than ever. The man who had followed him into the cafe sat at the counter pretending to read the menu. Elijah had noticed him on the bus, again on the street, and now here. He didn't know what the man wanted, but he knew it wasn't coffee. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the judge's number. His fingers hovered over the call button, but before he could press it, the man stood up. Elijah's eyes followed him in the mirror behind the counter. The man didn't make a move, just walked out slowly, looking down at his phone. Elijah's phone buzzed 1 second later. Unknown number. You're not as invisible as you think. The message made Elijah's stomach drop. He slid the phone back in his pocket and stood, heart pounding. The world outside the cafe looked brighter than before, too open, too exposed. He didn't want to go out, but he couldn't stay either. He reached the door, hesitated, then stepped into the light. Across the street, Judge Walters watched through the tinted window of a parked vehicle. She hadn't wanted to bring him into this, not this soon. But the attack at the protest had changed everything. She saw the way Elijah moved, calculated, cautious, alert. He was already adapting, and he didn't even know what he was part of. Yet, beside her, a federal investigator looked at her with unease. We should have picked him up sooner. He's not a suspect, Walters said. He's the reason I'm even still doing this. The investigator raised an eyebrow. One kid? One good kid, she answered, and they're watching him now because of me. So we do this my way. Elijah didn't see the car watching him. He only saw the silver SUV pulling up near the corner, the same kind of vehicle he remembered from the protest. The door opened just slightly. A voice called out, calm but firm, Elijah. He stopped. Then turned. Judge Walters stepped out, dressed in dark gray, her eyes serious but not cold. "Come with me, please." He hesitated only for a second, then got in. Inside, the judge wasted no time. "You're being followed, watched. Not by police, not officially. But someone wants to know who you've talked to and what you saw that day." Elijah looked out the window, lips dry. "Why me?" "Because you paid attention," she said. "And because you matter more than you realize." The car pulled into an underground garage. Inside the federal building, Elijah was guided through a back elevator and into a small conference room. On the table sat files, a laptop, and a small audio recorder blinking red. The judge sat across from him. "Elijah," she said gently. "What?" "I'm about to show you stays here. You don't talk about it outside these walls. Not to your friends, not to your family. Not yet. Do you understand?" He nodded. She pushed a file toward him. It was thick, stamped confidential. Inside were pictures of Officer Grant, some in uniform, others off duty, along with documents marked with red tabs. Elijah flipped through them, confused. These are internal reports. Things no one's supposed to see. They tell a story of a man who's hurt a lot of people, but never faced any real consequences. Elijah swallowed hard. "You want me to testify?" "No," she said. "I want you to tell the truth. But not just about him, about what you saw that day and what happened after. Because they think they can scare you into silence." He leaned back. "They almost did." The judge nodded slowly. "But you're here." The room fell quiet, but not far away. Officer Grant paced inside a warehouse office filled with surveillance screens. He wasn't working alone anymore. A man in a clean black suit leaned against the wall, arms crossed. He spoke with authority, but his badge wasn't visible. Grant watched one of the screens, a grainy shot of Elijah getting into the SUV with Judge Walters. "He's not just some kid," Grant muttered. "No," the man said. "He's your problem now, and he's protected. You move wrong again and you're finished." Grant clenched his jaw. "I already am finished." The man straightened. "Not if you cooperate." Grant's eyes narrowed. "Cooperate with what?" The man handed him a folder. Inside was a list of names. Back at the federal building, the judge was explaining what came next. A closed hearing. Legal backup. A motion to expose the buried complaints against Grant. And maybe, if everything aligned, new policies that could prevent this from happening again. Elijah wasn't listening fully. He was staring at the wall, where a small black camera blinked silently. "They're always watching," he whispered. The judge followed his gaze. "Yes," she said, "but now, so are we." Outside, the city moved like nothing had changed. Buses ran. People walked. Sirens blared. But underneath the surface, pressure was building. News stations had begun to circle the protest story again. Social media was digging up old posts, videos, interviews. The name Elijah Brooks was starting to pop up, and so was the question, who is this boy the judge is protecting? And more importantly, why does everyone want to silence him? Back in Elijah's neighborhood, 2 unmarked cars circled the block. His mother had returned from work early, confused to find strange men knocking on doors, asking routine questions. She tried calling Elijah, but it went to voicemail. By nightfall, someone had broken into her mailbox, and when she returned from taking out the trash, a single envelope sat on their doorstep. No stamp. Just one word written across the front: warning. Inside was a printed photo of Elijah at the protest. He didn't know about it yet, but he would, because the people he was up against had just sent their first real message, and it was only the beginning.